It's almost like, when people leave the White House communication team, they turn up on Fox News or they turn up on MSNBC or whatever. It's almost like Chris Luxon has been invited by TV3 to be an advisor for Labour.
Yeah. A revolving door. Yeah. Well, there's also like a National Party Air New Zealand revolving door, it seems like, as well.
Yeah. Let's start there, shall we? Okay, now, I'm obviously being slightly facetious. I prefer to think of it that I'm placing my tongue firmly in my cheek than being facetious about this. But there was a report put out by the government where we're being told that the number of Kiwis leaving New Zealand is going to, quote unquote, skyrocket. Excuse me. That wasn't a C word cough, by the way. TV3 had Mr. Luxon on this morning in their breakfast show, AM, and they asked him what Labour should do. Let's first have a look at the interaction. So this story is based on the idea that there's an official report out by the government or by a government agency talking about the upcoming number of people that are going to be leaving New Zealand. So the setup is Christopher Luxon was asked by TV3, what should the government do about this? How do we keep Kiwis in New Zealand? And this was the response.
Oh, look, I've travelled all around the world. I think New Zealand's a great place. I have to say to you, though, that, the OE is an everyday sort of, or a real rite of passage, I guess, for Kiwis. And we want Kiwis to be able to travel. But what we don't want them doing is choosing to leave New Zealand because they don't think it's a place of opportunity where they can get ahead. And I think you're right. I think for young people today, and the ones that I talk to up and down the country, they're saying, look, my wages are low relative to Australia. The housing's cheaper and the cost of living is almost half. And so we don't want them thinking that there's more opportunity in other places for them to settle long term and to be able to leave our country and have our talented brain drain sort of exit this place. And so we've got to work much harder at making sure this is a place where people feel they can start up a business, they can make something happen in their community, and it's a great place to raise their families. And so first and foremost for me, the government needs to get a much better grip on this cost of living crisis, and that's about managing inflation. Today, we're going to see interest rates be announced. They're either going to go up another 25 or 50 basis points already this year. If you're lucky enough to own a home, your interest costs have gone up $8,000 on a $700,000 mortgage. The government has to do a few things. It can't just leave it to rising interest rates. It has to be able to control and rein.
There we go. Melissa's about to come back in there and keep talking. But the point's been made. So, as I said, obviously, tongue-in-cheek, facetious, whichever word you want to use, TV3 basically seeking advice for Labour from Christopher Luxon. What should this government do? It just made me think it's a really interesting question. What should the government do? But how about we bring on an economist or a business professional or an employment specialist to actually answer the question, rather than the leader of the opposition to use it to score points and just basically say, how do we fix it? Well, they're crap. They can't. We'll do better. Sure.
100%. Like the brain drain and people going overseas is something that we've dealt with for decades. And COVID was always going to, people came home because our COVID response was really good. And they were always going to go back overseas. I don't understand the freak out here. I mean, he's identified what the problem is. Our wages are low and our cost of living is high. Some of those things you can solve. But yeah, you don't hear any solutions from him. You just hear, here's the problem. I mean, my sister's a nurse, and they've gotten through this whole thing being the literal front line. And yeah, she could leave tomorrow and go to Australia and effectively almost double her wages. She doesn't necessarily want to, but when you're looking at paying down an enormous student loan or trying to buy a very expensive house, what are you going to do?
Look, Chewy, I think the point that you're making is sort of what I want to echo as well, is the reason it feels like disingenuous politicking in this situation. It's a little bit like, we're going to solve the housing crisis. It's a trope that every political party puts out in the lead up to the election. They suck at housing. We're going to do better. And then nothing changes because it's very hard to change a housing situation when we have not enough builders to build houses, a demand outweighing supply. And And this feels a bit the same, because he's saying, we don't want our people to go offshore for more opportunity. I don't want to be the bearer of bad tidings to anybody, but there will always be more opportunity offshore than in New Zealand. Always. Because New Zealand is tiny and the rest of the world is very, very large, where there is 100%. More opportunity. The other thing about more money, again, I don't want to be a bearer of bad tidings, but there will always be more money offshore. Because if you go into a market of 300 million people, let's say to America, and you rise through the ranks, then there is more money made by those businesses. They pay their people more. And finally, there will always be cheaper living overseas. I mean, because we are an island isolated from everywhere that brings everything to this country. It's no different from in Hawaii. So much more expensive to live in Hawaii than it is to live in California. And part of that is because they have to get stuff bought to them from the mainland. And it makes cost of living more expensive, whether it's food or building materials or whatever. So this feels disingenuous, and it feels like, I would love to have a good conversation. Maybe we can do it here about that. How do we stop this happening? Do we need to stop this happening? But to just kind of softball the leader of the opposition, I don't know. I think it's a missed opportunity.
I've been saying this to MPs for years, and they'll make a statement, and then you go, "Oh, that sounds really good. How? How are you going to make it easier for people to start a business?" I mean, I can think of a way now, get investment money out of housing. So if people want to invest their money, they've got to invest it in a local business. That's a better rate of return. That solves two problems. But also, how? How should always be the question that these guys are fielding. Because otherwise it's just talking points.
Deindustrialization and globalization is definitely going to make that sort of those potential ways of combating brain drain harder. I mean, I don't think it's impossible to for example, raise wages so more people stay, right? I don't think we should box ourselves in. It's bloody difficult because the powers that be, especially if Luxon gets in, don't want to do that, right?
Yeah, is he going to raise the wages of all the nurses? Do you think national? That's going to happen under national?
Exactly.
It's not happening under Labour, so
yeah. But there are ways we can still appeal to people, and it might even be how we define that appealingness as well. New Zealand's still a nice place to live. For some people, it's also their home, and they might have this deep connection with it, or the geography of the place and that sort of thing. But yeah, definitely like cost of living and that sort of thing is not helped by deindustrialization and
let me also just say a couple of things before we move on to the next one. Is that, I mean, to his credit, Mr. Luxon talked about the OE. It's a part of who we are, because we're living in the bottom of the world. Have you got the same page as me, George?
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I'm going to grab it off you, actually.
It seems pretty.
There you go. Look at that.
Seems pretty speedy.
Is because we've always done the OE. We've always left. That's the first thing, because we live at the bottom of the world, and for us to see anything, we need to go elsewhere. The second thing is, I didn't include the question from the journalist, but it talks about leaving permanently. I know the last time I did this research, leaving permanently meant being out of the country for more than 12 months. That's what leaving permanently means. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm never coming back. And finally, this is the chart that I wanted to bring up. Sorry to steal it off you there, George, but you can have it back in a second. This is the number of New Zealanders departing since back to 2002. And what you can see what happened, and because the report talks about 50,000 people, and Luxon on some level is pearl clutching, saying that it's terrible. The average number of Kiwis departing New Zealand before COVID, which is here, was between 42, 45 and 72,000 people. Ironically, the biggest number was under National here at 72,000 people. But this is an early century Labour government, and you can see over their term, more and more and more every year, more and more Kiwis left, and then National gets in, and then fewer Kiwis left, and then under National, a big upscript to more and more and more Kiwis left, and then it goes through the National government here where fewer left, and then it gets to COVID, and obviously goes a bit mad under COVID where no one's leaving and more people, the black line, are coming. So the pearl clutching of the network giving Mr. Luxon a chance to comment on this. So now what they've given him an opportunity to do is see down here where we've got only 8,000 people leaving. If that jumps up to 50,000 next year, which would be the norm, there's no question that the National Party will be going, gosh, look at that, an extra, it's gone up by, what would that be, 500, 600, 700% under Labour. It's like, well, yeah, that's because no one's leaving now because of COVID. And the number last time under National was up to 72,000 a year. This is what I talk about when I want us to go one step deeper and at least show people what the truth is behind the tropes. The truth behind the tropes. There you go, George. I've just given us a tagline. The truth behind the tropes. Because it frustrates me. And like I said, great question. How do we stop this? The first answer would be maybe we don't, because we never have. But the second answer is if we do, let's get someone on with the actual qualifications to tell us how to stop it, as opposed to the leader of the opposition party. And when I say the leader of the opposition party, I'm saying forevermore. I'm not talking about Mr. Luxon in that instance. I'm talking about the leader of the opposition party now. And let's say we have a different government in 18 months, the same for the leader of the opposition party then. Let's get the experts in to talk about it, as opposed to the people to score points and manipulate the data to tell a story that's not really there.